Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome once again to the new Yankee Workshop. We have a beautiful spring day here in New England, and our daffodils are in full bloom. Now, I have a confession to make today. You might recall that about 9 years ago, I built a fireplace mantel for my then unfinished living room. Well, the living room's done, but I have 2 more rooms that are not quite complete that have fireplaces. That's the bad news. The good news is that today I'll be able to show you another fireplace design. This one we're calling Colonial style. So let's go over to the house and check out the site conditions and then come back here and build a mantel. Next, right here in the new Yankee Workshop. This is one of my favorite rooms in our house because it has a lot of the new Yankee projects that I've built over the years. For instance, this lowboy made out of cherry that I built a couple years back. And over here on this wall, I have the mahogany Federal game table. And in this corner, a painted cupboard, which was modeled after one that we found on the island of Nantucket. And then I have a chair, a special chair in here, this Windsor chair, modeled after one that Bill Wallach, the great chair maker in Pennsylvania, showed me how to make. And of course, this painted cupboard, which I designed several years ago, and we use it for everyday china. Now, the first new Yankee project to be installed in this room was this fireplace mantel. And over the years, a lot of you have bought the plans and built one of your own. Well, it just so happens that upstairs in the master bedroom, I need another mantel. But this time I want to do something a little different. I actually have 2 fireplaces that need mantels, one in the unfinished library downstairs, and this one in the master bedroom, which I look at every single day, and I've just got to do something about it. So I have some ideas. So let's go back to the workshop and see what we can come up with. Well, here it is, one of the 2 mantels that I need. We're referring to this as a colonial style mantel. Our research showed that simple mantels, which were painted white, would fit that description. Now, I've built ours out of poplar and M.D.O plywood. It's really a rail and style system. There's a vertical column on each side, which has a long, narrow panel and a square panel. Connecting those 2 is a horizontal panel, which is simply divided in half. I have this small molding, which wraps the bottom edge of that horizontal panel and goes right around the corner. A nice crown under a mantel shelf, which is pretty thick and has a decorative edge. I also made these beaded pieces, which I'll scribe to the brick during the installation. Now, if you'd like to build a colonial style mantel for your home, a measure drawing will be available with the materials list, and you'll hear more about that before the program ends. Now, when I designed this fireplace, I had a building code issue. I would have liked to have had this element right here be down at this level, but it sticks out 3.5 inches in front of the brick. And the building code says that no combustible material can stick out more than 1.5 inches if it's within 12 inches of the firebox. So what I did is I raised that element up so it's 12 inches away, and I filled the gap with this piece right here, which is only 1 inch thick, so that meets the building code. Now let me show you the materials we're going to use. We picked poplar because it's a painted project, and poplar paints up great, and it's very stable. It's a nice material to work with. So I went to the lumber yard and bought all the poplar that I needed from my materials list and then rough cut it. Here's a piece of 8/4 by 8 for the mantel shelf. Here's a piece of 5/4 for that filler. This piece of 5/4 will be made into the molding, and the 1x8, 1x6, and 1x4 will be cut into various rails and styles. These 1x2s will be planed down to make the beaded pieces, and I have a piece of crown molding. So let's get started milling up some rails and styles. Use any power tools? Let's talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. Now we're going to start out by ripping some stiles for those vertical panels. I want a finished dimension of 1 7/8 inches. If I were to buy 1x2, that's not wide enough because 1 by 2 comes 1.5 inches wide. If I buy 1 by 3, that's okay, but my experience is that narrow stock that's been hanging around the lumberyard gets all twisted and out of shape. So what I like to do is buy wider stock and rip the narrow pieces out of it. Now, I could joint this edge and rip the piece that I want, but my experience is that once the fibers are released as the cut is made, that what was a strain edge will then cup or curve out of shape. So what I'm going to do is rip the pieces about 1/4 inch wider, and if it curves, I can straighten it out at the joiner. People often ask, how come I get such good results fitting pieces together? One of the reasons is this tool, the joiner. Not enough shops have them, and they don't get used enough. This is our 8-inch joiner, and when I set it up, I set the in-feed table lower than the out-feed table by 1/32 of an inch, and I very seldom change that setting. Now the key to straightening a piece of wood is how you do it. Now here, if I put this piece down, you can see a very slight gap right here. Now I can actually push it down and make it straight, but that defeats the purpose of the joiner. All I want to do is keep the wood up against the fence, which is perfectly square to the table, and just guide it through. A couple passes and this piece will be as straight as an arrow. Well, there you have it. Nice and tight to the table. You couldn't even slip a piece of paper in there. Now I'm going to set my fence to 1 7/8 inches plus 1/32 of an inch. The freshly jointed edge and place that against the rip fence, make my cut, then back to the joiner to clean up or dress that freshly cut edge. Well, there it is, the exact width that I want, nice square edges, and perfectly straight. Now, I never do this too far ahead of time because temperature and humidity can affect this stock. Now that our stock is sized, we're ready to join the pieces together. And I'm going to use a classic rail and style joint like this. The rail is coped on the end, therefore referred to as the cope cut. And the style is referred to as the stick cut. Now this takes a 2 router bit set. This router bit right here will make the stick cut. It makes a groove and the profile. The one that's installed in the router table makes the cope cut. Now to make the cope cut, you can't push the piece through freehand. I need something to guide it through. I can use a standard mitre gauge and possibly a backer block and simply push it through the bit. However, there's a better way, and that is to use a sled. The sled has the advantage of a clamping system and a backer block. I simply slide the sled against the fence, push my stock tight up against it, and clamp it down. It holds the piece safely as I push it through, and this backer block will prevent any tear out. It's safe and it's simple. Now I've switched to the cope bit, and what that's going to do is give us this ogee and the groove. The important thing here is that the stock stay tight to the table as it passes by the bit, therefore the featherboard. Now that I've completed making the joints for the rails and the stiles, I need to fill the void or the field, and I'll do that with a plywood panel. There's a bit of a dilemma here. The router bits that I used to machine these parts, and all manufacturers in fact, make an exact 1/4 inch wide groove. But today's 1/4 inch plywood is starting to run pretty thin. So I would have a pretty good gap on the outside that I'd have to fill, and I don't want to do that. So I stepped up to one size thicker, which is 3/8, but now it won't fit in the groove. So what I'm going to do is make a rabbet around the back side of those pieces so they fit just right in the groove with no space. We'll do that next. Here's the setup for making that rabbet. I've installed my stacked dado at a 1/2 inch width. I've installed this sacrificial fence because part of the dado will be under it. And I've installed this featherboard to make sure that the stock stays down to the table nice and tight as I pass it through. Well, finally we're ready for a little assembly. I'm going to put a nice thin coat of glue in the groove and on that ogee wherever it meets a rail, and I'll also put glue on the tenons of each rail. We'll assemble it with the panels dry, no glue, and clamp it up. Now with so many mating surfaces for the glue, that's what really gives this joint a lot of strength. Okay, that's one of the vertical panels. One more of those to go, and a panel to connect the two. You'll notice that as I've built these vertical panels that I've left the stiles long, both at the bottom and at the top. After the glue dries and I sand it smooth, I'll trim them off, and that will square up the top and bottom of each panel. Now the horizontal panel has this short stile to divide it up a bit. I glue and clamp that in place first. Let's take a look at our prototype, and I want to show you how the horizontal panel meets the vertical panel. The vertical panel comes all the way up through to underneath the shelf. Here's the seam, the edge of the vertical panel. The horizontal panel has a stile on each end. When the panels are dry, I'm going to biscuit the horizontal panel to the vertical panel. And when it's sanded smooth and painted, you'll never know there's a joint there. While the panel's dry, let's start working on this piece of molding that runs right along the bottom edge of that horizontal panel, crosses the vertical and turns the corner. I'm going to start with some 1-inch thick stock and make a bead first. Then after the bead is complete, I'm going to go to this wavy edge bit and remove the rest of the material. We'll do all that at the router table. The first pass to make that molding is done with a beading bit, a 5/16 inch diameter. I've set up the bit and I've set up a feather board to make sure the stock stays tight. Otherwise, if it comes up, it'll ruin the piece. Now I've switched to the wavy edge bit and I've turned the stock up on edge, and now I'll run it through. Now I've set up my table saw so I can split it right down the middle. With the panels out of the clamps, I've sanded them nice and smooth, and now I'm ready to trim them. First, I'm going to square up the top edge using my panel cutter, and I'm going to cut just to the edge of this rail. Then I'll cut them to the correct length. All right, I think the simplest way to join these panels together will be with biscuits. So first, I have to cut the slots. Get them all lined up. We'll clamp these pieces together, let it sit overnight, and we will easily finish this project tomorrow. Okay. It's going to be a great place to hang the Christmas stockings. Well, good morning. The glue dried on our panel last night. I removed it from the clamps this morning, and I sanded those joints nice and smooth. So once it's painted, we're never even going to know there's a joint there. I also took the time to put this layout line, which aligns with the bottom of the panel. And that's for the molding that we made yesterday. That's going to locate that molding so it's flush and it continues square across these vertical panels. Now, I don't want to show this end grain. I want to do a nice mitre around the corner and return it to the wall. All right, so what I want to do is place the molding in place, swing the mitre saw to 45 degrees, and make a cut. All right, now I can take that piece and line it up with the edge to mark the length, but it's always a little ambiguous as to exactly where I should hold this. I've made plenty of molding, so what I can do is take an extra piece, cut a mitre on it, and then I'll be able to locate that corner exactly, and then mark the other end. All right, now I can take the two pieces, bring them together until the mitre is perfect, right there. Don't move anything. Walk down to the other end and mark the length. Okay, back over to our chop saw, line it up, make the cut. All right, a little bit of glue on the back side of the molding. Bring it to my line first, then take the piece that I mitered as a gauge to locate it. That is good right there, so we'll nail it with some 1¼ inch brads. Now for the return, glue on that joint, bring it together, and I'm going to leave it long, put 1 brad to hold it in place. When the glue sets, we'll trim it off. Now I want to start working on this crown molding, which goes right up underneath the mantel shelf. It's a stock molding that I picked up at the lumber yard. I've put some marks along the top edge of the panel. That's about 2 7/8 inches, which is the height of the molding when it's installed. Now I want to miter these corners and return them to the wall. Here's the setup to cut the miters on the crown molding. The molding is in the miter box upside down. Imagine the fence as being the face of the mantel and the bed being the underside of the shelf. Now what I did is I made a block that's exactly the same height as the molding will be when it's in place, the line equivalent to the lines on the mantel. Hold it in place till it's even and then clamp a straight edge along this front edge. Now that'll make sure that all the miters are the same. I slide it over here now with the miter at 45. I can make a cut. Now I bring it over here, set it right on my line, take a small spring clamp to hold it in place, and we'll follow the same procedures I did on the lower molding. Okay, there's the return piece on this end of the crown. Nail that in place. And then we'll start working on the shelf. Here's our blank for our mantel shelf, and I've just rounded over that top edge with a 1/2 inch radius bit. And what that does is it gives me a little shoulder and a nice round over. The next step is going to be at the router table where I'll start to form this cove. At the router table, I've set up this outfeed support because I have to do the short ends, and this is a relatively long piece. I have a 1 inch round nose bit and a featherboard set up. I use my miter gauge to help me push the ends through, then we'll run the length. The last step in the molding process is to round over this bottom edge. Just knock off that corner. So I've installed this bullnose bit, and I've also put a filler out here to replace the material that I'm removing as I pass it through. Well, a little more sanding on that molded edge will finish the shelf, but I don't want to attach it now. I'll do that in the field when I do the installation. The last thing I want to turn my attention to is putting a bead on these pieces which will return to the brick and this filler. We'll do that at the router table. The stock for the returns is poplar. I've planed it down to 7/16 of an inch thick, and it's about 2½ inches wide. Now to form the bead, I'm going to use a bit like this one. It's a beading bit, except the one that's in the router table has a 3/8 inch diameter. Once again, I want to use a featherboard to keep the stock tight to the table. And now for the filler piece, which goes above the firebox, same bit, except this time I'm going to run the stock on its edge. These pieces will be installed in the field as well. Now it's time to put some primer on these. The primer I'm using on our mantel is an alkyd primer. a good base for both latex and oil finishes. In my case, I'll be using an oil finish for the trim. And you can see why painters love this M.D.O board. Takes the paint beautifully, and when it cures, you end up with a nice, smooth finish. After the piece is primed, we'll let it dry overnight, and then we'll bring it to the house and do the installation. Let's review the conditions here. If you were able to look behind this plasterboard, this whole bump out is a solid masonry mass. There is no wood, no studs. It would be a lot easier if there were. What I actually have are metal strips which have been attached to the masonry, and then the plasterboard was screwed to that. I'm going to use the same strips to attach the mantel with some screws and a little bit of construction adhesive. But first I want to center it and make sure it's level. I'd say that's pretty good. Now I'll pre-drill for my screws. I'm drilling a through hole and a counterbore, which we plugged later. Now this construction adhesive, once it cures, will stop this mantel from trying to go anywhere. All right. Now I'm going to line it up with my pencil mark and push it up against the wall. Make sure the adhesive is pushed tight against the plaster. Okay, I pulled it tight. That should do it. The transition between the mantel and the brick face is done with these returns, that beaded edge that I made in the workshop. And first I'm going to cut them to length, and then I'll scribe them to the brick face. Now the top piece, which should fit right in because I cut that at the shop. You'll notice that the returns are proud of the mantel face by about a ½ inch. I want it to be flush, so if I set the dividers to that dimension and then come and place the divider against the brick face and scribe it, I can remove that material, and when I put it back in, it'll be in the right place. With the piece scribed, I'm just going to run a bead of glue down the edge where it's going to meet the mantel, and I'll attach it with a few brads. Now that filler that I built earlier goes right up in here. We'll drive it in and tack it. And a couple brads. And now for the mantel shelf. I scribed it to the wall, and I've put a little construction adhesive on the back edge, and I'll attach it with some screws and brads. Well, a couple coats of paint on this mantel and it'll finally be complete. I can tell you one thing, I'm going to sleep a lot better tonight. Now let me show you what we're going to build next time. I've been meaning to build these for quite some time. Plantation shutters. Interior window shutters that are hinged and have movable slats to control the view and the amount of light. To build them requires a few jigs. Once those are built, the rest of the process is very straightforward. That's next time, right here in the new Yankee Workshop.
If you've enjoyed this new Yankee project, you may want to try some of the others. There are projects meant for the workshop, the garden, the kitchen, and many more. So whether you're a fan of Shaker style, or Colonial, arts and crafts, or Chippendale, there may be a Norm project you'd like to build. Whether it's a clock or a gazebo, a picnic bench or a Windsor chair, a child's toy or a sailboat, visit the New Yankee website at www.newyankee.com for a complete listing.